Ayo Phillips, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Pleasure and an honor to be here.
Well, I finally got you here, Ayo. We've been talking for well over a year, maybe two. And I think it's going to be worth the wait. You'll be a familiar name to some listeners, Ayo. You've been a member of the SMB Twitter community for years. But for most others, you won't be known, and I'm excited to introduce you to them. Your story of buying a business is long, tortured. It didn't turn out the way you would have liked, but you have done such a good job at remaining philosophical about the experience and reflecting on what you learned, how you grew. So in our interview today, I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for these reflections of yours. So what we'll do is go through your story proper pretty quickly, condensing I think it's about a 5-year story into about 30 or so minutes, and then we'll spend time digesting it. So let's get right into it. Ayo, your background, please. What led you to buy a business in the first place?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for that, Will. So I think my journey started where I grew up. So I grew up in Nigeria, in Africa, in West Africa, and moved to the United States as a teenager, which was a dream come true in and of itself. You know, there's 200 million people in Nigeria who are always looking for that opportunity to come to the United States, right? I mean, there's a saying that, when you get here, it's kind of like being in heaven. Little did they know that there's something that happens after you get here, and you kind of have to continue to work and push. But it was a dream come true, and part of my journey in entrepreneurship really started as a kid. My dad, who never got the opportunity himself to start and run something, always imparted in us that, hey, listen, if you ever got the opportunity to start, operate, own a business, you should. And, part of that was driven by the fact that in the culture that we grew up in, a lot of immensely talented people, much more talented people than myself, who, if given the opportunity, to kind of allow their creativity to flow, would be wild successes. And that's one of the great things that the United States provides to people. And so, when you get the opportunity to come over here, it's like, how do I maximize the opportunity that I've been given, right? And so that's kind of where the journey started, and that was imparted in me at a very young age. I moved to the United States for college, studied a chemical engineering degree. One thing about Africans is, you're either going to go into the sciences, for a degree, or you're going to something in finance or law. Any other degree wasn't something you looked at. So I didn't necessarily love engineering, but it was that, okay, well, this is a path to financial security. And so that was the road I took. Graduated from college, and during college, I started a few businesses. One of them helped pay partially for my education. So I always kind of tweaked that entrepreneurial part of me through the course of that journey. Graduated, went to work in corporate America. Again, another dream. In my first job, the first job I ever had coming out of corporate America, coming into corporate America, was a role in which, when I look at the math of it, in the first 6 weeks in my job, I earned the same amount that my parents combined earned in a year. Wow. and so these things were happening. These were really joyous moments, but I kept wanting to go, right? You don't reach these hilltops and stop. You want to keep going, and that's a big piece of what this story is about here, and we'll get to it eventually. Anyway, fast forward, kind of kept hitting a lot of goals, financial milestones that set, professional milestones, and then I got to the job that I was told that if I worked hard, I would get it. In corporate America, I got to that role, and I got there and I said, well, this is not exactly what I expected it to be in terms of how I expected it to feel. And so at that time I was married, and I told my wife, I was like, I know, we have a great life. We were living in California at the time, not too far away from the beach. And, I just had a great life. And I said, well, can I uproot all of this? And can I go pursue this entrepreneurial dream? And, her and her wisdom said, well, yeah, you can do it, but let's not be stupid about it. So let's find a safe way to do it. And so what that meant for me was, I applied to business school as a way to say, okay, well, if I pursue this entrepreneurial thing and it doesn't work out, I would have, great fallback options. I got into Northwestern Kellogg School of Business, and then we transitioned there. And the summer before I got into Kellogg was when I found out about search funds. I didn't know I didn't know what private equity was. I didn't know what search funds were. But one thing that resonated with me about it was the fact that, well, I didn't have to go from 0 to 10, like many others, right? And this kind of like fit with the model that my wife and I talked about let's do it in a safe way. You could acquire a business, and there's a piece of it that was just seemed incredible to me, and should seem incredible to anyone who goes down this journey, is that there are people out there who are willing to invest millions of dollars behind a novice, which is what I considered myself, at the time, to go out and buy a business. And could not believe it, obviously, coming from the background, but it turned out to be true. After I investigated it, I spent my entire time in business school kind of investigating, the search fund path, and ended up, partnering with the family office, while I was in business school, and we decided that we'll go down this path together. There's a lot to unpack there, about, why not just, kind of raise money from, what's called the search fund mafia and others. And there's a lot of thought that went into that for me. A few reasons for that was, one, I've come from this kind of deep blue collar manufacturing background, where I got to lead, kind of large teams. And I thought to myself, well, a lot of these traditional search fund investors don't like, these types of businesses. And I want to go and do something that I already know. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to move down that path. I will say, though, the search criteria that are out there, there's a lot of wisdom in them. And for those who are thinking about, deviating from them, you need to be careful about making those choices. And you'll see some of that as I go through my story, is, the recurring revenue track, and making sure that revenue is growing, and strong profitability, and some other things. I think those things are important to keep in mind. Fast forward, partner with this family office, very supportive of, kind of allowing me to kind of go down this path and explore other, maybe not what would have been non-traditional search industries at the time. And the other thing I liked about that path was the fact that I didn't have, many investors I had to go talk to say, hey, listen, are you interested in, putting up the dollars for me to buy this business? I had one decision maker, and, they were with me throughout that journey of making those choices. And so, it was kind of like, okay, well, we're married together, and, we're going to make these choices together. And when it came time to actually write the check, there wasn't this entire process that you needed to go through to find, get the investors to kind of agree to this. And what is important about this for searchers that are listening to this is, when you're searching for a business, you need to think of yourself like a project manager, right? So there are multiple different work streams that you're managing. You're managing the seller, which is sometimes the most unpredictable portion of this. You're managing your own emotions. You're managing, lawyers, bankers, QOV providers, and if you can reduce the variability by having something manage itself, right? It's leadership 101, right? So you delegate the things that you can delegate. That increases your chances of success. And that's kind of what was my mindset. And that should be the mindset of every researcher, is, kind of like, find the things you can delegate. In this case, I delegated the fact that, I didn't have to go to multiple different investors to go raise. They were with me through the journey. I didn't have to spend the 40, 80 hours, of trying to get people aboard.
So there was just the process of getting them on board, and they were going to take your whole equity position, all the equity
Correct.
that you needed, that your sole investor. But Ayo,
Yes.
how did you weigh that against there is some value in diversification of investors. So you were going all in with this single partner. How did you did? Is it as simple as you thought it was worth the risk, or is there more to say there?
There isn't much more to say there. I mean, I think the way I thought about it at the time was, the speed to close outweighed the risk of, the diversification, right?
Okay.
So, and to me at the time, I saw this as a very long-term kind of thing, and I thought, being married to one versus being married to many was kind of a better fit for me on a personal level. I tend to be pretty, simple in the way I think about things. And I will tell you, kind of like in hindsight, I think that you could make the case for either path, right?
Yeah.
But that was the path I chose, and I'm glad I chose that path.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So carry on.
Yeah. So ended up, partnering with them. Started off searching in manufacturing, which is where I started to realize that those multiples will not work. Anyway, I'm going to condense those 2 years into very short points. So I had 3 LOIs. Two of them were proprietary. The deal I ended up closing on was a brokered deal. The earlier 2 LOIs ended up dying on the vine, for different reasons, businesses that I loved, but they died on the vine. And this particular transaction came up roughly, I'd say, 5 months, 5 months before, technically when, your 2-year search timeline would end.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, and so, it's kind of, getting to the end of it and, trying to make decisions about what you do next. And I will say that, my emotional state at the time, kind of looking back on it, was one that was going to try to find a way to get a deal done, maybe to the detriment of the quality of the deal to a certain extent. And this is more hindsight looking back now, because, when you look at some things during diligence, and you're like, well, maybe I should have said no because of that, right? Or maybe I should have said no because of this other thing.
Well, anyway, you're not alone, Ayo.
Yeah.
Especially in people who are kind of following a traditional search fund model. You get toward those 24 months tick away very quickly. And as you get toward the back half of them, you start to feel some urgency. And if you're really committed to this path, really committed to buying a business, it's very easy to loosen your criteria to make something happen so that you can go off and be an owner, which is what you set out to do.
Yes. So anyway, ended up, kind of closing on this transaction, and that's kind of where the fun begins. I would say. So I closed on the transaction. It was at the end of July.
July of what year?
2017. That was, and kind of my wife and I were living in Chicago at the time. She was 9 months full pregnant.
Wow.
With our second son.
Ayo, let me ask you also, I think you can't say much about numbers in this interview, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you can't say numbers, what can you say about, give us a picture of the business, the size of business, if you would. And what is
sure. Oh yeah. So the business at the time when we acquired it was a resurfacing and refinishing business, and they provided that service to apartment complexes. At the time we had, when we acquired the business, we had roughly 21 team members, split between, technicians and kind of, call it administrative staff and supervisors and that kind of thing. It was kind of, I would say it was smaller than the typical traditional search investment, but bigger than, what would be a self-funded a self-funded deal today. That's kind of the rough size of the business.
And resurfacing and refinishing means exactly what? What is this? Give us a picture of the service.
So we went into apartment complexes, and in between the time that a resident leaves and a new one comes in, we would go in and refinish countertops, cabinets, bathtubs, and that was kind of the scope of the business at the time.
But it's not a full quote unquote turnover. It's not a turnover service.
It was not. It was not a turnover service when we acquired it, but it became that. When we sold.
Okay.
So it is a turnover service, but so turnover services, they're typically five services. So there's painting. There's something that's called make ready or handyman services. Then there's resurfacing, and then you do kind of light electrical and plumbing as well, as part of that full turnover, essentially.
Gotcha.
And yeah, so fast forward now to the so we've acquired the business. My wife is 9 months pregnant. We're living in Chicago. The business is in Houston, Texas. And so, I fly down, and introduce myself to the team for the first time. I didn't get to meet them during diligence, which is kind of one of those things that, sometimes you get to do, sometimes you don't get to do. In hindsight, I wish I would have gotten to do that prior to the acquisition. But anyway, so my wife is pregnant. So I fly down. I spent a few days there. So I then flew back up to Chicago about roughly 10 days later in preparation for my son's birth. It was the intention was that I was going to be there for like 2 days and be back in Houston running the business. Well, there were complications with my second son's birth. And roughly 10 hours later, I went to drop my son at home with grandma, and I get back to the hospital, and I go to my wife's room, and she's in the OR. Wow. And I'm like, well, what happened? You're like, well, she fainted. She was bleeding. We had to rush her into the OR. I hear nothing else for the next 3 hours while she's in the OR. I'm sitting outside of the OR. And then, this is crazy. The chaplain for the hospital, this is probably around 1 a.m. in the morning. He comes and sits by me.
No.
Apparently he had been called basically to say, hey, you need to sit by this guy. We're not sure she's going to make it, essentially.
Wow.
And so I'm sitting out here. The chaplain is with me. He's praying with me. He's talking with me, and just kind of keep me going through it. He didn't tell me this, but I knew that's why they sent him to me. Anyway,
but
so
sorry. Did you think that she had passed, or did you?
No.
Very likely pass.
Well,
in this moment when you see the chaplain appear,
I thought she might. Yeah, I thought she might. Right. Yeah. And when I asked, they said, well, that's what we do when we think someone's not going to make it. We send the chaplain over.
Wow.
Anyway, so this is roughly 3 hours into the surgery.
Yep.
I'd say another 3 or so hours go by. And then, the surgeon comes out and is like, man, you're a very lucky guy. She's going to make it. Yeah. And I was like, obviously, I break down weeping, and I'm grateful. And then probably another 3 or 4 hours go by. The surgery is done. She's put in a medically induced coma, which she stays in for the next 5 or 6 days. And so, obviously I'm by her ICU bed, and I'm, trying to get some work done. During that same week, payroll, I was going to have my first payroll with the team, and the guys, the technicians go to start cashing the checks, and the bank refuses to kind of like allow them to cash their checks. And obviously I'm not there. I can't solve it. And, I'm in the ICU. And at the time, I don't know why with this hospital, they wouldn't let you kind of use your phone, the ICU. And I was like, well, I kind of have to kind of deal with this. And so, I'm spending hours on the phone, trying to get money moved and trying to get these guys paid, because obviously, as a first impression, this was kind of like one of those major trust busting things, right? You take over this business, you say, it's going to be a better future for people. And all of a sudden, you're dealing with this.
Well, anyway, and that first payroll is kind of it's kind of a make or break moment. It really needs to go smoothly. It's kind of a first impression, trust building moment. Brutal.
It is. So it was brutal.
How does the team react? Right? You hear that that they're being refused, but how are people reacting? Are you getting insight into the team?
Yeah. So, I'm at this time, I'm kind of like line into my bookkeeper and, line into kind of one of my field supervisors. And, basically like I could hear like the cursing in the background on some of these calls, while they were like in front of them demanding their pay. And so, eventually, again, this is one of the benefits of having the kind of partner that I had. They kind of helped, kind of move some dollars around while I was, kind of in the ICU and doing some of these things, and ended up getting the folks paid. So
your investors, to be clear.
Yeah, my investors. Yeah. So crisis averted in that particular situation. And so
I'm going to interject with realizations that you have prepared this great Twitter thread of this story. We'll link to it in the show notes. And of course, I reviewed it closely for preparation for this call. And you have these, you pepper the story with realizations that you have at various points that I plucked out here. So when we hit one, if you don't articulate it, I'm going to do that for you.
Sure.
I think this is the point in the story, realization number one, where in your Twitter thread, you say, this is what it means to be a small business owner. My family, my work, and my life are intertwined in a way that's unlike anything else. Say more.
Yes. So, for many, and I didn't take out an SB loan. For those who took out an SB loan, this is even more so. But you are in a place in which you've invested dollars. You've invested dollars. You've invested time, and your family is along for this ride. But you also now have this new baby, right? This new baby is the business, right? And your ambition and your identity is tied to this new baby, right? While the family that you came to the journey with now has to deal with this new thing in your life, and then your money as well, right? Whether it's the fact that you took an SBA loan or you took money from investors, right? And you told them that you were going to make them whole and you're going to make them wealthy as a result of those dollars in your business, right? And when you have those things all coming together in one, you're in a place in which if you're in the corporate world, you can separate, like your work from your life, from your money, and and you have like these, kind of vacation days and paternity days. None of those things exist as a business owner because you've essentially caused them to be one. The business is now a baby. You've got a family that you brought to the game, and then you've also committed to invest money on behalf of people and make sure that they come out ahead by being with you. And so it's just something that is very difficult to explain until you go through the experience yourself, and just and really start to kind of like feel what it feels like to be in that seat now, which is very different from kind of your prior role in a corporate environment where you're just exchanging your time for money, and at some point, yes, that can end, but it's very different than taking someone's money and using it to kind of generate more potential.
Well, and these boundaries between everything falls. The compartmentalization goes away. It's all it's all blurred into the one blob of your life.
Yeah. And the other saying I tell people now is that like one of the reasons that people go down this journey is like, oh yeah, I want more flexibility. And what I always tell them is like, your body might not be at work, but your mind will always be on call. And you just have to accept that walking into this journey, right? You're never gonna be in the place that you once were, in a corporate environment in which, like you could walk out of the office and, kind of put your out of office sign on and that's it, right? Your mind will always be on call. And the thing about the way the human body is created is that, right, during the nighttime is when the body tries to put pieces of the puzzle together about problems that you need to resolve. And so the sleepless nights that you hear that SMB owners have, right, is because of that, is that you don't have enough time, within the day to actually solve problems. And so during your sleeping and resting time, the body tries to put the answers together so that you wake up in the morning with those answers. And so, it's a 24/7 thing, really. And, anyone who's walking down this path should just be well aware that that's what you're walking into. And yes, you will get flexibility. You might not be there in body, but I can tell you your mind will always be, kind of working on the business.
Great realization. Great point. Thank you. Carry on.
Yeah. So let's see. So we get through that situation of
your wife recovers.
Kind of yeah. So she recovers. Didn't happen for many more months, but she gets out of the ICU. She spends roughly 5 or 6 days in the ICU. I'm there with her, and then I fly back. I fly back to Houston after she's somewhat kind of like mobile, and grandma was at home and could help watch over her a little bit for me. And so I fly back to Houston, and during that period of time, it was hurricane season in Houston, and what ended up happening was a 500-year flood was was coming through the city, and
This is Harvey.
Yeah, Hurricane Harvey. And so, and I'm a little embarrassed to say what I'm about to say next, but like I had just been away from the team, for I think it was a total of 11 days, unplanned, and in that moment, I had a decision to make. I could stay, in Houston, or I could go back to Chicago, where my wife was recovering from a traumatic birth. Right, I'd only been in Houston roughly 3 days, and Harvey was going to hit. And, in that moment, I actually was like, well, I really should just stay here, with the business. And like, I haven't been here enough. I've got to be here. I've got to tend to this thing. And
these are still the first 11 days or 14 days of your ownership, to be clear.
No. So we are now probably into day roughly 20 or 25.
Okay.
But of those first 20 or 25 days, right, more than half of it was spent not there.
Yeah.
And so, at this point, again, so the reason why now in hindsight, I think there was an issue there is that, again, I talk about kind of like the identity piece of this, where, again, like your identity is so tied to the business that you can't effectively see clearly that, well, you came to the game with a family that will be with you beyond, whatever this business does, whether it's successful or not. Right. And it was actually a decision to say, okay, well, I guess I should go back because, she kind of needs me versus no, like this is a no brainer. You go back, you be with her, because you could be stuck here for, you don't know how long. It could be 20 days. It could be 30, you just don't know. Anyway, so I fly back and I'm there with her, but obviously my mind is not there, but I'm watching the scenes from Harvey in horror, as the city is getting devastated, no flights in or out. I'm having daily huddles with the team. Well, not with the team, but with like two of the team members, just, figuring out where things were, if their families were okay and all that. Luckily we ended up with some minor damage, but, we had lost, kind of like roughly a week and a half of any kind of, revenue generation during that time. And, and then, one of our employees did have some issues at their home. But we resolved that quickly, and we were back on our feet. I'd say roughly, call it 20 days in. 20 days post Harvey, we were kind of back up and running, and things were back in shape. Anyway, so after those days spent in Chicago, roughly 7 or 8 days, I fly back to Houston, and my time might be off on some of this, but I ended up doing what I should have been doing, which is getting to know the team a little bit and trying to figure out, what was going on. And something I should have mentioned was that, prior to acquiring the business had been declining. Another red flag that, is important to note here. So it had been declining, and, we had retraded the seller as a result of that. But it sometimes it turns out that you can outstructure a bad deal, right? And, sometimes it just makes sense to walk away. Even though this has, a positive, ending eventually, but sometimes it makes sense to walk away, and so we structure it as declining. And so I go out with one of the key supervisors, on the team, and I'm doing a ride along with him, and just, learning, who our customers are, what our team does. We have Gatorade in the back seat, I'm handing it to our technicians as we go from property to property. And so I was asking him, hey, listen, this business has been declining for some time now. What's going on? How can we, get it back up and running? And so at first, he's a little coy, and he's like, well, we just need to, do more for the customers, and, this and that and this. And I could tell that he wasn't fully, kind of telling me exactly, what he really meant, or what he really wanted to say. And one of the next thing he said, absolutely floored me. And he said, well, what we really need to do is we need to hire women to go F the guys, is what he
Whoa.
said.
Whoa.
Hire women to go F the guys. And I, at that point, I thought he, I don't know if I thought he was joking. Obviously, I was shocked. I was quiet. I was just trying to contemplate more. And he said it again. Well, he's like, well, we need to hire women to go F the guys. That's what we need to do, right? So what he was referring to there, essentially, yeah. So what he was referring to there was that essentially, with apartment complexes, you typically have property managers, and then you have maintenance men on property. And these maintenance men are, they are your gatekeepers in many ways to the work and service that occurs on properties. And so what he was suggesting there was that, well, if you do this favor for those guys, they will generate bogus work orders, which will gin up sales. Essentially, that was his solution.
The domino effect of what this means for the business. It's not just that you have the guy that you're doing your ride along with is kind of a bad apple that you might need to get rid of.
Yes.
It's in that you bought a business where totally shady stuff happens, but it just starts to make you is this how you have to play in this industry? Is this what your competitors are doing? If you, it starts to cast a pall over the entire industry that you're in. There's so many follow-on negative implications of him saying that.
I will say this, that from an industry perspective, right, and a market perspective, this was a very this was a symptom of kind of a broader market problem, is what I would say, because it wasn't just this wasn't the only tactic that I came to be aware of as I moved down and as I learned more about what was going on within the market that we were in. Later on, as I started to get the opportunity to go out into the field, I was walking onto a property, and one of the maintenance guys, he's like, "Oh, are you the owner?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, welcome. Thank you for stopping by. And we've been waiting for you to kind of like, come stop by." And he walks me onto the property. It's like, "Hey, listen, like, if you want to maintain this property, you have to pay me $500 a month, in order to maintain this property as one of your properties." Wow. Right. And, I want making clear the point around, the industry and market dynamics associated here is we were just in a marketplace that was used to, good quality work, good pricing, good structure of services, providing the customer what they want wasn't enough, to kind of win you the customer, right? This was a low barrier to entry, tons of new entrants constantly, tons of immigrants like myself who were coming from all over the country and were like, man, if I could get this one property is worth $60,000, right? Mm-hmm. And think of yourself if you just walked, if I just think of myself, 20 years prior, right? If I just walked across the border and, I'm now in the United States and, I have this opportunity to win this property and someone tells me, hey, listen, all you need to do is pay me $500 to win this property. It's not, and I need to feed my family. Maybe, the rules of ethics go out the door, and you make that call.
I wonder why, what is unique about this industry that these dynamics are happening? In more than 300 interviews, I haven't heard a story like this. And so I'm just wondering, are these more common in small business land than I have realized, or is there something particular to your industry? And it sounds like it might just be endemic to this because you have this weird dynamic where one maintenance guy who probably doesn't earn very much money controls $60,000 or is the gatekeeper to $60,000 in spend.
Yeah. So actually, I don't think that your framing is correct there, right? There's several industries with these issues. So, if you go up north, right, mm-hmm. the garbage industry is like this, mm-hmm. right? The dumpster rental industry in some markets is like this. So, this is not an uncommon thing, and that this is a very important point. Is that, and it's part of the big lesson here is that when a searcher is doing diligence on the business, right, they need to carefully investigate the industry and the market, right? not just the industry, the market as well, because there are market dynamics at play, especially in highly competitive environments, which again was should have been another red flag. Because again, within the searcher world, right? One of the traditional search rules is don't go into highly competitive industries. Just don't do it. You're going to face headwinds. Logistics industries is like this, right? Not in totality, but in segments of it. So there's several industries that fall into this realm where they're kind of illicit practices that people used to drive revenue. And I will say, actually, in my situation, this business in many other markets around the country would have been incredible. Would have been an incredible business, right? It just so happened that we were in a market in which very highly developed, 600,000 apartments, and the apartment industry actually, outside of New York, this Houston was kind of like one of the bigger apartment industries, and so it was longer and further developed, and had kind of evolved into this thing that had metastasized into kind of some of these practices over time. So these things these industries don't start that way, but as they get more competitive, people find ways to win that may not be up on the up and up. And market and industry are different things, and you need to diligence both. Not just the industry, you need to diligence the market as well. Because
and you mean the flavor of the industry, the practices. How would you have diligenced? How would you have found out that this practice is not uncommon in this industry as an outsider?
Yeah, so it's very it would have been very difficult. But there are a couple of things I would say. Number one is try and truly understand what are the barriers to entry into your marketplace, right? At a very high level. So if in my case, the barriers to entry were, if you had like a certain type of paint gun, right, and you went through a 3-day class, you could have entered the resurfacing marketplace, and started, kind of offering the service. That's number one. Two, the access to the clientele, the access to the customer, right? Anyone could walk on a property, right? There's no gatekeeper. Anyone could walk on a property, find the maintenance guy, and sell them on something, right? Three, in this case, right, like that individual, if you look at their compensation related to the assets that they're managing, right? I mean, there's an opportunity there for, for a lot of things to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some things that, again, a lot of this is, I have a hindsight bias now, and I can tell. I would say a fourth thing, and this is something I tell every researcher to do, is you want to kind of understand what I call relationship concentration. Everyone talks about customer concentration, and is it 2% or 5% of sales and all of that, right? But relationship concentration is something different. It's that, yes, you might have multiple different customers with a small portion of revenue, but if there is any bottleneck from a relationship perspective, maybe it's like one person on your team that's managing like 8 relationships, or one person on the customer side that's actually responsible for multiple different, kind of like locations. Wherever you see relationship concentration, it's possible that there could be other things going on there, to kind of maintain or keep those relationships.
So in your case, the maintenance men there was concentration of high relationship concentration in the form of these maintenance men in your industry. This word that you used before, I think is really is a great word to take for the audience to take away: gatekeepers. Try to understand. I mean, and so too is your concept of relationship concentration. Try to understand if there's relationship concentration, but in general, also in most industries, there's some sort of gatekeeper somewhere, and just understanding how the gatekeeping works in the industry is valuable. Maybe it's another version of saying the same thing you're saying.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very important point, especially when it's a situation in which, these guys were making like $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right. But they were controlling spend in sometimes the low millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The asset that they're responsible for is maybe, anywhere from $5 to $60 million in asset value.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's kind of easy, relatively easy, in that marketplace.
Ayo, this
Yeah, go
point
ahead.
about the competitiveness of the industry, and
Yeah,
you call it a red ocean industry in your Twitter thread. This was one of your realizations that I wanted to call out, versus blue ocean industry. I can't remember. I don't know which business book that comes from, but it's a classic framing.
correct.
Blue ocean industries is, there's a lot of opportunity and not a lot of competition. Red ocean is basically just blood in the water, competitors killing each other to get business.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you'll hear in our world is that it can often be easy to outcompete what are seemingly competitive industries, because in a lot of these competitive industries, the service is terrible. In blue collar service, home services, probably in commercial services as well, the service is terrible. So as long as you bring a better caliber of service, which isn't that hard, the threshold isn't that high,
Yeah.
you can steal market share pretty effectively, pretty quickly. Does your experience give lie to that framing?
So there's two. I would say at a high level that can be true, but there's two issues with that in the framing. So in the HVAC industry, right? That framing that you've described works the best when you're thinking about B2C businesses, because you have absolutely no customer concentration, and winning additional market share, right? It's not like building a relationship that's recurring over time. So in an HVAC business, right? I mean, yes, if you're going to provide better service and you're higher in the Google rankings, there's like tons and tons and tons of customers to go after, right? In this industry, it's different. There's a fixed number of apartment complexes that exist. There's a fixed number of potential buyers, that control multiple different assets, and so it's a completely different dynamic there,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So that's one.
Okay.
Two, there's this idea that I like to frame as what you call the technician operator, or the passionate operator, and this is the guy that you're competing against that is not doing it for profit. They're doing it for meaning, right? They have been a technician all their life, right? They don't know how to run, they don't know how to run a business. And if him and I walked into a building and said, hey, listen, I need to charge $10 so that I can earn a profit of $2 at the end of this, right? And because there are so many of us, me and him and 9 other people that walked into that building, that buyer has the power. So this goes back to Porter's 5 forces, right? That buyer has the power to pick one from the 10 of us.
Yeah.
Well, he's a passionate, guy that's doing this for meaning. He's doing this so he can have work tomorrow, right? He's not doing this necessarily for profit. And so when she says, well, no, I'm only going to pay you 5, right? He's like, okay, I'll take the job.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take the job. So it's very different. So it's very different from that perspective, right? When you combine those two factors, the fact that you don't have a broadening of the customer base as you would have in a consumer situation, and you pair that with the fact that you're competing against people who aren't doing it for who are technicians first and business owners second. That theory that you just spoke to really quickly falls on its face.
Okay.
And that's kind of what my experience was.
Great. Well, Ayo, I'm just watching the clock, and we have a long way to go. So let's return to the plot. So you've learned that it's a corrupt industry. What happens next?
So, well, in between all of this, obviously I'm a rookie CEO, like I like to call myself at that time, and I'm making bad decisions too, right? So I'm hiring people from industry to fill industry people, and part of this happens before I really fully understand what's going on in the industry. I'm hiring people from the industry to come into the business. I ended up with 19 known former employees that became my competitors during the course of this process. Ended up with a lot of turnover. While I was in the field, I hired a general manager too early, which I know is a theme, with some of your guests. And she came in, and we had different styles. That was one thing, but she also kind of helped me accelerate the turnover. And but I was kind of like, well, she's filling the hole right now. I'm going to keep her in there for now while I figure out this market thing. But we ended up parting ways, probably 5 months later. But 5 months too late, she caused some more turnover. So I'm making some bad hiring decisions as part of this, right? And and so anyway, so some of that is going on during the course of this time, and so and maybe a couple of lessons there. Number one is, you know, a lot of times, people talk about key man risk and, kind of like, you need to kind of like, get people into the right roles and all that. And one of the things I tell people today is, sometimes the best way to get rid of key man risk is for you to become the key man temporarily. It's not going to be permanent, but you need to be that for a period of time. You can't just put someone in the role to kind of like, just cover up gaps when you actually don't know yet what you need, right? This is not the case in every business. It depends on the size of the business and where you are in the journey. But sometimes, entrepreneurs should not be scared to become the key man. Mm-hmm. You become the key man for a period of time, and that way you understand really what you need, and then you can then progress forward with hiring the right folks. Anyway, so I made a lot of errors there from a hiring perspective, but eventually, I basically make the decision that I have to treat this like a startup, which is kind of what I was trying to avoid. My wife was.
I think we haven't heard that basically sales start dropping fast.
Oh,
in the first 6 months.
And
you've mentioned the turnover, but you're losing people fast. So this decline in the business, I guess, certainly continues, maybe even accelerates. So why does this? When does it become clear? Why does it become clear, other than this corruption stuff, that you've bought a lemon?
Well, I mean, I'd say over the next 18 months, roughly 18 months, I mean, sales were down, I think it was like.
And why were they plummeting? What was happening?
Well, I mean, I was losing clients. I was losing clients to multiple different things. Some of it was what I just talked about, but some of it was, I was breeding competitors within the business. I mean, I think within the first month or two, I think I lost like 4 or so people who then went and became competitors of mine. Wow. One thing that I didn't say is that the guy I was talking to that told me about this plot, to kind of like hire the women. He was running a side business at the time with his wife. His wife used to work at this business. I didn't really know that at the time. And so they were siphoning customers. And, one of the decisions I made, and I think I talk about this in the thread, was, there were so many holes to plug at the time that I actually brought the wife back in, even though I knew this guy was holding me hostage. I brought the wife back in to help me kind of transition from a paper-based system into kind of like an electronic-based system, because she understood the business better than most. Wow. But in doing that, I was handing them kind of customers as well, because obviously when they left, they took those customers with me. But the point there is, like, in crisis, right? You often have terrible choices to make, right? But sometimes you just have to make them in order to survive to the next day, and then clean them up later. When you have a better opportunity and better foresight and kind of better bandwidth to deal with things. But bringing her in was a good decision for me, because without bringing her in and kind of institutionalizing some of what was kind of tribal knowledge across the organization, I would not have had the system, right, to eventually kind of use it to kind of build the business back up. Anyway, so sales are plummeting because of some of the stuff I talked about. I had multiple different competitors from within the business. I had this general manager that, she ended up stealing from me, but also stealing from the company, but also kind of like, started her own thing after I let her go. But yeah, the industry dynamics, I would say, were kind of like the primary dropper of kind of sales, and sales dropped more than 50%. Profit dropped way more than 50%. At the time, in those first 18 months or so. And
what's this doing to you, Ayo, personally, emotionally?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's easy to, you're kind of laughing about it now, but I assume in the moment, right, you weren't so philosophical.
Well, no, I wasn't. I mean, I tend to be somewhat of a numbers guy, but I started not to want to look at the numbers. It was kind of one of the first signs, right? But there was also a part of this where I was just kind of like, I was waking up every day and just trying to deal with whatever was next, and not really processing. There was not a lot of processing.
Yeah.
I would tell you though that I was the worst husband, the worst dad that you could ever think about. I think, I felt like I was failing, but I didn't know how to verbalize it. And so the way that played out in my family, in my life, was verbal eruptions at my wife or being silent, right? Wanting to either really hold my kids really close or not to be around them at all, right? I think you talk about fetal position moments. There were several for me, but the one that I remember a lot was, at night, typically when I would get back home, I would just sit in my truck in the driveway, right, for like 45 minutes. And I would just, kind of lay back and close my eyes for a few minutes in preparation for kind of like walking into the house,
Yeah.
And, the goal was to try and, get myself in the mood to deal with home, right? And let my kids not feel it, but I was not successful at that. And it brought my marriage to the brink, to
Really?
be quite frank. But my wife forgave me. She forgave me. She showed me a lot of mercy. God showed me a lot of mercy during that period of time. And so, yeah, it really, that definitely was, those were, I had a bunch of fetal position moments. I gained 25 pounds during this period of time. I was eating like crazy. I don't drink, so luckily I didn't have that vice. But
Yeah.
it was it took its toll. It took its toll on me and my body, and most importantly on my family.
Yeah.
And something I will say here too is like, and there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this who have a family and like, well, I'm doing this for my family. Well, one of the things I tell them, I'm like, that's sometimes a falsehood that we tell ourselves, and it's used to cover ambition that's driven by ego, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
we're typically trying to meet someone else's definition of what success is, not what the wife and kids that we have at home think success is.
Yeah.
And I think, as men, or women who go through this, we need to kind of like be realistic and tell ourselves the truth about what we're really doing.
Yeah.
We're pursuing an ambition. We're not pursuing what they told us to. My wife did not ask me to go do this. We had a great life before we started going down this path, and we had other opportunities that we could have taken, without kind of putting the family through this. So that's kind of, some of the personal toll that some of this took on me.
That was great. I also just want to say for any Breaking Bad fans out there, the obsession with that show, I think, is just because of the wild nature of this dour chemistry teacher becoming a drug kingpin. But under that whole trajectory of those 5 or 7 seasons or whatever it was this theme that you just talked about. He starts selling drugs and he breaks bad because he needs to pay for his son's cancer treatment. And he continues, as his ambition grows and he continues being more and more successful as a kingpin. He tells himself and eventually his wife, who finds him out, I'm doing this for the family. I'm doing this for the family. I'm doing this for the family. And in the final scene of the show, spoilers, everybody, in the final episode of the whole show, he finally admits to her and to himself, I did this for myself. And it really, I really feel like that's really the kind of the whole message of that show, which is men, like you said, I think in particular, can frame to themselves their ambition as selfless, as being the patriarch, as providers, when really it's an ego game.
Yes, it absolutely is. And well, at least for me, it was not for everyone. I don't want to speak for everyone.
Sure.
For me, it was. But anyway, so that was that, and that was one of the big lessons there is, for men out there, just be careful about what you think is selfless, because sometimes it's not, Anyway, so declines happening. It's obvious that we can't continue to try to make hay in this market that we're in. And so, I go back to my investors. I'm like, well, I never wanted to do a startup, but I think we're going to have to treat this like a startup, you know, and we have to find new customers, new markets, new geographies that we need to all get into. And so,
and so you throw your hands up at the industry. The industry is just too flawed, too competitive, too corrupt to continue on. Okay. All right. So, but
yes.
Presumably when you talk about being a startup, you talk about you're looking at adjacent opportunities. You're not going to pivot
Correct.
too hard. You're going to
Right.
pivot a little bit into these better, more attractive, but adjacent industries.
Yes. So, and then, I think, and now that, I have folks, kind of sending me their investment memos to look at their deals and, like invest and all these things. And if whenever I see one that has that as its, as one of its first things, where there's like a slight business model change, immediately I'm like, well, no, I'm not participating in that. The search model is about, buying, an enduring business that can exist, without you having to make these kinds of changes to it. But
exactly,
here I am,
something that already works.
Exactly,
kind of the point.
Exactly, that's the point. So to your point, I throw my hands in there and say, well, we're going to have to treat this like a startup, and I tell my investors that that's what I'm going to do, and so I start just testing out a bunch of things, a bunch of different ideas, just leveraging the team we had. And this is kind of like where you can kind of look at what you have, right? So what are the assets that the business currently has? What are you currently good at? Can you offer that to a different set of customers? Are there skills that your current team members have that you can leverage in different ways? I mean, so we give a few examples. So the name of the business had surface in its name. And we were doing resurfacing prior. And so one of the ideas that I was like, well, let's start a driveway resurfacing business, which is something we had never done. We started that business, and it generated like six figures, from doing it, which we brought some cash in. We started a roofing business because one of our project managers had some experience in roofing, so we started that. We started an HVAC business which failed miserably. that failed miserably. We had a warehouse, with inventory that we were using for our team members, but I turned that into a store. We turned that into a store for our competitors, some of them who had left me to go compete against us. I turned it into a store. So we got square readers, and we marked up the product in there and started selling that, and that ended up being like a nice new great revenue stream for us. I hired
Ayo, at this point, I assume much of the team has turned over. And what I'm getting at is so much disruption in this business. We searchers have to be very delicate about making changes at the business. It spooks the employees. It can cause a mutiny. It can cause huge amounts of turnover. I guess you didn't have to worry about that because so much turnover had already happened.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I was the most tenured employee in the business. I had done every job in the business. I had written all the job descriptions for every single role in the business at this point. So I'm the most tenured employee, aside from our bookkeeper, who she stayed through it all. But there was no one else in the business. Well, on the technician side, we did, but there was no one else in the leadership or administrative ranks in the business, customer service, all of that was there when I acquired it at this point. So this was a business in my own image at this point. It was like, it was basically a startup, right? At this point. And so, so I didn't have to worry about, what are the people going to think? Because, everyone that came, I personally hired. So it's kind of like a follow the leader kind of thing is what we're going to do. Although I did burn my team out with trying a lot of these things, right? Because today I'm like, well, let's try roofing. Tomorrow I'm like, well, we're going to do some HVAC today. The next day, I'm saying I put our bookkeeper on Upwork to generate some revenue.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about going into red oceans. Upwork is pretty brutal.
Well, she made some money. She made some money doing that.
Oh, yeah?
She made some money for the business doing that. So, but anyway, so we tried a bunch of these different, kind of like things, and all of them, little by little. I mean, those things, they all together they made good money. But the thing that helped this not be a we're going bankrupt thing was that we went into an adjacent market, like you said, and that adjacent industry. It was still kind of turnover services, but it was turnover services for single family rental owners. So
Mhm.
if you remember, right? So, and I'll talk about the pre-COVID part. So basically, apartment complexes have existed forever, but single family rentals have now become an asset class that, institutional investors are making investments in. It's not as developed as the apartment complex side, right? Because it's newer. It only started in 2008 after the financial crisis.
Sure.
And so that was just becoming an asset class. And these new institutional owners did not have professionalized service providers to go out and do the turnovers for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went
Perfect.
knocking on their doors. Yeah, knocking on their doors, in Houston, and say, hey, listen, we can provide you this service for you. And the first door we knocked on, I walk in there. I'm like, he sets us up as a vendor that very day. 3 days later, we start getting work from them to go perform turnover services. Within 3 months, it's like a 6-figure a month business.
6-figure a month. Wow.
Yes, a month. Like within 3 months. Within 3 months of starting working on this. And that was from one client. From one client. One client in one city, the city of Houston. I mean, it was transformational. Let's put it that way. I mean, it was transformational for the business at the time. And so, we take that, we start scaling that, I have these other things that I've started and start shutting them one after the other, even though they were earning some cash. This felt like, okay, this is the thing that we need to proceed forward with. And so we proceed with that, and it's growing like crazy. It's growing like crazy. and so,
and you're getting other clients. It's not just growing within this first single client.
Yes. Yeah. So after we get that client, I start to hire, I hired a project manager, and I keep selling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I keep knocking on doors. And so we grew to a few other clients. And then roughly 5-6 months into this, COVID hits.
Yeah.
And obviously, everything goes to zero. And at this point, I'm kind of like, well, I'm on my ninth life at this point. I'm like, well, whatever, it's COVID.
At least it wasn't your fault this time.
Yes. You
say that on the Twitter thread.
This is that's a very important point. I felt like everything else up until that point was my fault, right? I chose the business, I chose the industry, right? And every choice after that really did not matter. Even some of the errors I made in hiring, if you buy a good business, it can sustain some of those mistakes, right? But kind of choosing the business I chose, choosing the industry I chose, essentially set me up for the turmoil I experienced in those first 24 or so months.
Yeah.
So when COVID happens, like, okay, oh man, this is the first one that I didn't cause. So let's play it out. But obviously I've built kind of like a hardness to me at this point. I'm like, okay, well, what are the choices we need to make? A few important choices, and this is kind of important because I believe that we're walking into kind of a treacherous time in acquisition or entrepreneurship, in which people are going to try to buy great businesses, but they may not always hit the mark. And so you're going to run into challenges, and you're going to have to kind of be in turnaround situations sometimes. And so there's a few things that I think are important to note here. One is keeping your sales generators employed in turnaround times, right? So I'm not talking about salespeople, I'm talking about sales generators. So that's the person that's actually doing the work and, allowing you to exist. Because if you have a downturn, you want to be the first to be out there with your client base and telling them, hey, listen, I'm ready to go, right? Before your competitors are. So we kept sales generators on.
Sorry, what is a sales generator? If it's not a salesperson, it's the person, the delivery, the technicians delivering the work.
Correct. The person that's delivering the work, right?
Okay.
And you can salespeople can fall into that realm as well. Every business is slightly different, but every business is going to define the sales generator a little bit differently, right? Okay. So, but it's mostly the person that's delivering the work, because sometimes if you're a software company and you let go of engineers and like you actually need engineers to get software out, I think you need that more, especially in a situation like COVID, where it's like, kind of like a downturn that was caused by a God event, so to speak. Yeah. And so we kept those guys on, cut staff. We tried to do it the way I did it, and this is what I encourage sometimes when you're in that kind of situation is, I think you can encourage people to leave and say, hey, listen, guys, things are going to be slow for a while. We're going to have to make some decisions, and tell them up front, right? Which is what I did, because, I wanted to not have to lay off people, even though I still had to. And, we got lucky. Some people just left on their own, which I was happy by, because it reduced the number of people that I actually had to kind of like cut and, kind of, trim the business to size to a certain extent. But we were still.
I think this is the point in the story in your Twitter thread where you say you were a hardened mofo.
Yeah.
Say more. How had you hardened? How had you changed?
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to describe it is, everything, when you acquire a business, everything seems existential to you initially. Every little problem. Oh, that person left. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Oh, my 2% client left. What am I going to do? Oh, the roof is leaking. What am I going to do? Right. Everything seems like it's a big thing. Right. But because of the experience that I had, right, I would say, my blood pressure was not modulating with the vicissitudes of the business, or what was going on the day to day of the business anymore. It just did not modulate that way, right? One of my kind of like 16 commandments of search is, things are never as good or as bad as they seem. Manage your emotions accordingly, right? And that is so critical in this journey. But you have to train yourself to get to the point where you can manage your emotions. I mean, accordingly. It just doesn't come by you being there. But it's good to know that, hey, listen, it's never as bad as you think it is, and it's never as good as you think it is, regardless of how good. Well,
the thing I wanted to make sure we hit this, so I'm glad you're bringing it up. And let me say one thing before I get to my question, which is that this is something that I've heard a lot of guests who've had fetal position moments say, which is, yes, the business, when I had that fetal position moment, I was going through a hard time. The business was going through a hard time. But part of it was my own, my skin has gotten thicker over time. And today a similar event could occur and it would roll off my back. So part of the fetal experience, it seems, is that you just haven't, your skin hasn't gotten thick yet, and it's almost more internal than it is actually a statement on the wheels coming off the business. Now, let's be careful. Sometimes, and so actually, it's a perfect segue to my question. In fact, though, Ayo, you were in a business that was collapsing, so your fetal position moments in those first 18 months seem perfectly justified.
Yes. Right, but I think they do seem justified. But the broader point is this, and I think I'm going to get to this later. Like, in the context of life, right, and in the context of just living, I think that the fundamental principle is this: when there's life, there's hope. The only time when there's no hope is when you're not living. Right. So regardless of whatever the situation that you're going through at that particular moment is, the fact that you are alive means that there's hope for it to become better. That's why they're never as bad as they think it is. There's a lot of what happens in business, right? So we look at metrics, right? We think about leadership and all these other things. But for business owners, a lot of what makes you successful or not is your mindset and how you manage that, right?
Yeah.
Another commandment I have is like, if your waistline and your business are in crisis, fix your waistline first. It'll fix your mind, which will fix your business. The idea behind that is like, your mind controls what happens day to day within the business. And as long as you have life, there's going to be hope for a better future. So even in the worst case scenarios, I mean, even in a bankruptcy scenario, right? Which would be the worst case scenario in a business, in a business environment. It's not the end, because you are still alive, which means you have hope for the future. And a lot of times, as individuals, we think of ourselves within the context of other people and what other people consider to be success, right? Yep. And what other people consider, and that ultimately leads to, and this is going to go into kind of what I'm going to talk about. One of the key lessons at the end is that, even if, even if you walk out the door of this business with $100 million, in your pocket, right? Talk to any business owner that's exited business. You do go through, if you're not prepared for it, you go through kind of like a period of depression, because you realize that, well, I thought that this was the goal I was striving for, right? But it doesn't fulfill me the way I thought it was going to fulfill me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I say, like, whether it's good, you think it's good, or it's bad, right? You it's important to kind of like understand that it's not going to feel the way you think it's going to feel, right?
Yeah.
And so you, as human beings, it's kind of like we need to have the second order of understanding that there's a spirituality beyond just kind of like what the physical, manifestations of what good or bad look like, and you have to kind of like manage through that piece of it on a day in and day out basis. So I think that's really the point. And for the business owners that do this the best, I work with one now. So I'm a private equity. I work as an independent sponsor with a partner today, and he's one of the most positive, optimistic leaders I've ever met. And like
this is Thomas Ince.
Yes, and he shifts the world to fit into kind of into what he wants it to be, right? Things that look impossible to him are like, well, it's just it's all possible to him, and
wow.
it's been such a pleasure being around him, and I've learned a lot being around him. But anyway, so that's the overarching point there, is like, we need to kind of like, get out of this thinking of like, oh yeah, oh man, yeah, fetal position moment, it's going to end. And that's just kind of it's a self-defeating mindset. And I do understand that, it's difficult to get out of it yourself, which is where, it's important to have peer groups, coaches, people around you that can help you recognize that, hey, listen, it's not, it's not going to end, right? People have been through worse, people have been through better, right? And, we just need to figure out to manage your emotions accordingly.
Yeah. Ayo, well, first of all, the 16 commandments that you're referring to, I don't think we properly plugged that, but you have distilled your key learnings from this experience into what you call the 10 commandments plus 6 of search, of acquisition entrepreneurship. So the 16 commandments, and of course we'll link to that in the show notes. It's really a wonderful, it's a 2-pager, very concise, and time permitting, we're going to hit a bunch of them. My favorites, I have 4 or 5 of these that we'll get to. So that's what you're referring to, audience, with the 16 commandments. I also, two questions. One related to this topic of how difficult or not this was for you. Do you think you had talked at the very top about your experience coming from Nigeria as a high schooler, how a country of 200 million people, virtually all of whom would have loved the opportunity to come to the US or some other rich country. Do you think that gave you broader perspective about how existential or not this misadventure was?
Yes. So I often say that, growing up in a third world country prepared me better for running this business than anything else.
Sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often say that. So there is that. But I do, yes. And this will just go to one of those, the big lessons here, which is, coming to the United States was a dream that in and of itself, if you rewind me back to that time, would have been the accomplishment of my life. But somehow that was not enough, right? I wanted more, I got that first job, made more money than I thought I could ever have made, but I wanted more. That was another dream. Set a dream for a goal. Okay, I wanted to hit my first $100,000 a year. I did that like 3 years into my employment as a 26-year-old or something. When I was that was not enough, right? Got the job I wanted as a professional, as a leader, within the organization that I was in. And that was not enough. The point being is that, we set these goals, and it's important to set goals and kind of move forward towards them. But they do not fully satisfy. And, especially in the United States, we have kind of like this feeling of, hey, we're a self-sufficient culture. And if I strive for this and I hit it, it's going to make me feel this way.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't, because one of the things I say to people now is like, for everyone that's listening to this, that's like, I'm searching for a business. You're really not searching for a business. What you're really searching for is you're searching for a purpose. And you're hoping that the business search and the outcome of that, whether it's the autonomy or the money, will fulfill you. Well, the thing about it is that it cannot fulfill you. Anything that's created, right, does not fulfill, right? It just doesn't. My family doesn't fulfill. And even worse is that it puts a bigger burden on my wife if I expect her to fulfill me. It's the same thing with, acquiring a business. It's the same thing with money. And so in my case, I came to terms with this in those fetal position moments, which is, typically, for every business owner, you're going to go through this process of getting to the point where you're like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my self-sufficiency, right? Whether it's in a great outcome or in one that is like a fetal position moment, and you're going to make a call. And that call that you're going to make is going to sound like this: "Oh God, help me," right? And the person on the other line, God, your creator, you might expect to say, well, I'm not AAA, don't just call me, don't just call me when you're in trouble, and one of the things that I found in my personal journey is that, God is looking to build a relationship with us, which is not the traditional view of how we think about God. It's like, okay, he's up there and I'm here. But no, it's not the transactional relationship that he's looking for. He's looking for like a true relationship with us on a day in and day out basis that we can walk with him on. And it's in that relationship that we find fulfillment beyond our wildest dreams, not in arbitrary goals, financial, family, or outside of that, that we find our fulfillment. And to me, if there's anything that anyone should take out of this interview, it's what I just said there. And it's going to look different for each person. And it's going to sound weird to some. But, we do weird things all the time, right? I talk to myself, right? If you think about that, within the context of life, the fact that I talk to myself, like, it's odd that you talk to yourself, you talk to other people. Well, talking to God is only one step removed from that. And I would encourage people to just try it and just have a regular conversation and see what that brings for you, and see if it starts to get you down this path of really understanding what fulfillment can look like outside of these arbitrary goals that we set for ourselves that ultimately do not satisfy us in the long haul. So,
Ayo, do you have a version of this advice for non-believers?
That is a great question. I don't. I don't, unfortunately. I don't, unfortunately. I think, I think there's a lot of good things in this world. It's difficult for me to see it outside of, kind of what I have come to know as my relationship with Christ, and he being, kind of my link to God in that sense. And so, again, that's been my journey, right? I think if there was one thing to take out of this for those who are like, well, I'm not really comfortable about that, with that, is just to recognize that fulfillment is not going to come from things that are created. It's not going to come from, the money you earn, the business you buy, the family you have, right? And in the case of the family or the people around us, when we try to make them into those that fulfill us, we are burdening them, and we're placing a burden on them that they're not designed to carry, right? And that is a very, very, very important thing to note, right?
Wow,
making my wife
profound.
Making my wife into the thing that should be my everything, that fills a hole that's really a God-shaped hole in our hearts, right? Trying to make her into that is just not going to close the gap, right? And instead, it's going to crush her.
And not fair to her, right?
Yes,
right.
It'll crush her. And so I think and it's the same thing with money. It's why people, get to those stages and, they turn to alcoholism and, start doing psychedelics. You know what's interesting about, kind of like, financial freedom, as you would term it, is that it's, it actually turns you into becoming a slave to your desires sometimes, right? So you think you're actually free, but you're now a slave to your desires, meaning, I should be able to kind of like, fly a private jet now. Well, that's great, fly a private jet. But guess what? The first time you have to go fly commercial because you didn't have to fly a private jet, how are you going to feel about that? Right? You're going to have a decline in your happiness because now you didn't get to do the thing that you just upgraded to do. And that's where happiness from created things or things that we aspire to falls on its face. Is because those things, once you get to them, right, you can only be let down. You can only be let down from them, you know? And so I think that's a critical concept that I think, even if folks are like, well, you know, Jesus or God, I'm not sure about that. But I think if you just walk away with this concept of, hey, listen, these things that I have around me that I think are going to satisfy me, money can be taken away from you, private jets can be taken away from you, and will make you unhappy when you don't get to fly on them, and you will crush your family if you make them into the people that need to fulfill you. And just start asking that question. Well, if none of those things does it, what does it, right? For me, the answer is clear, right? It's you know, it's God through Jesus Christ. And for others, it's going to be something different. It might be something different, but and this is one of the areas where I'm happy to talk with folks about and help think through, because I had to come to this realization, through a lot of kind of hard work. Hard work is not the right word, but I'd say God helped me come to this conclusion. I would say in many ways, right, through kind of building that relationship on a day in and day out basis. And so, this is, if this interview ends now, this is kind of where I would say this is the most important thing that I wanted to get across here was, as you walk through that journey, just think about it, through the lens of what does fulfillment look like outside of the things that I think are the goals that I'm striving towards, because those things are not going to satisfy. So
it's such a great question. So I'm buying a business, but what's the why? And that, always trying to understand what the why is. And that is such a kind of a obnoxious business book framing. But it does get to a central thing, which is that there's often a reason behind the things that we are ostensibly doing. There's an emotional driver, or maybe an emotional lack, but there's something compelling us in a direction, and we need to understand what that is, or it would serve us to understand what that is.
Yes.
Got to say, Ayo, I hate to be a negative Nancy, but I think for the non-believers, they would believe that feeling unfulfilled is simply human nature, that there is no answer to feeling unfulfilled. That's that it's what it is to be human. And it's just learning to process that is what you do, not seeking fulfillment, period, either in God or elsewhere.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I'm absolutely loving this, but I have to bring us back to the nuts and bolts of this story. Back to your investors, your decision to go with a single investor on this journey. Now, going through all of that turmoil, reflecting back on that decision, that marriage, how do you reflect back on that, going with one investor versus many? How are they reacting to all of this happening? How are they reacting to the phone call? I'm doing a startup, guys.
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the things I like to say about them is that we were kind of like teenagers that got married, right? We were like 17. We got married. We both didn't really know what we were doing initially, right? And we're going down this journey together. So to them, it was kind of like, oh, what's going on? But they were incredibly supportive through the period, right? And trusted in my, trusted that I'd make the right calls, but they were there, right? I had weekly conversations. Sometimes in between calls, we would talk. They visited very often and go back and forth. And they were very supportive through the entire journey. And it was a learning experience for them as well.
Yeah.
So so I'd say so pro and con there, right? So I felt like I had a real partner in this business.
Yeah.
The con is they weren't, gray-haired search fund investors that had done this like 50,000 times before and could have maybe stopped me from buying the business, or said, Ayo, this is not a good decision. Don't buy this. Right.
Yeah.
So pro and con, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, pro and con.
Great. So to get to the end of the story, because I still want to have time for a few of your commandments.
Yes.
So let's get to the end of the story. You basically get the business to a place where it's on solid footing with this new model, correct?
Yes.
And you decide that it's time to step out of the role as CEO. Why?
Yes. A few different reasons. One, more to the story. So we, COVID, causes a decline. But we get the business back up. And, we had like record revenue, start to grow our profits. But we were now in bed with these customers that were not paying, essentially not paying. They were not paying us. We were showing paper profits, stretching cash. And that caused a real strain on the business, both from a just people personnel perspective. I lost team members during that period of time, and so the business started to change as well, in the sense that if you think about that post-COVID world, right? Labor costs started skyrocketing, material costs started skyrocketing, and these were all the inputs into the business.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like another thing where it was like, okay, we have to change the business model again, right? And I would say the new business felt more like a construction business than kind of like the old business did, because we were doing much larger turnovers, for these new homes, for rentals. And so we just kind of looked at all of it and said, hey, listen, like, is this a business model that we want to be involved in, long term? Like where we started and where we are today, what do we see as, the long-term path for a business that continues to kind of change in this way, right? And so at that time, frankly, and this was probably a bigger piece of this, I had put my wife and kids through hell up until this point as well. And I'm looking at this change and the potential for another turn, for another thing where it's like you have to pivot again. And I at that point, I said, you know what? We have the business on a stable footing right now. Let's just maintain the customers that we have right now. I hired a GM because I said, okay, well, I've got to start reinvesting in my relationship with my wife, right? And the intention initially was for me to kind of like just step out of day-to-day operations into an advisory role. And so I had that conversation with my investors, and they in their wisdom were like, well, this thing could change again. It could change again, and it looks stable now, but it could change again. And it's difficult to be accountable and not in charge, is what one of them said.
And what did they mean by that? I had that called out here from your Twitter.
Yeah. So
difficult to be accountable, but not in charge.
Yes.
And not in charge.
Right. So if I would have stepped into an advisory role, and kind of like pursuing something else, but I had this new leader, who would have been the day-to-day operator of the business, the thought process was like, well, it's difficult for you to kind of be doing this other thing 100% full time, right? While, this other person is running it. They're relatively young in their career, they're kind of like progressing, they're doing well, but, you're still going to feel like you need to get pulled in, day in and day out. What they were trying to tell me wasn't in their best interest, to be quite frank. They were trying to say, like, it's in your best interest to cut ties with this business, is what they were trying to tell me. They were trying to say, hey, like, it's in your best interest for us to like just say it's done, and say that, we're moving on from this. And so, what ended up happening at that point was, earlier in the acquisition story, I'd had some strategic acquirers come in and ask about buying the business, but I was too ashamed to show them anything at that time. This was like, year 2.5 or so. I was too ashamed to show them anything then, because, the business was just in shambles. But now, I was proud, like we were just coming off like, record performance on several different metrics. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to call these guys and see if they have some interest. And so we ended up with 4 potential acquirers. We kind of, cut it down to 2. One of them dropped out, and then we closed the transaction with one strategic acquirer, which is an acquirer within the industry that we're in. And so that was kind of how we came to the end of the journey, for
And
me.
how was the exit financially?
Well, it was. I'll put it this way: if 3 years ago we thought that we might not make it, that the business might not make it. So, was it a 10x exit? No, but it was good enough for us to feel like, okay, we came, we saw, we accomplished something, and we conquered, and we're moving on to the next thing. It definitely wasn't the thing that I could retire on if I wanted to retire. It wasn't something that would make a name for my investors, but it was a thing where we looked at it in terms of the journey that we were on and considered it a miracle that we're even able to get the outcome that we did get.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were very happy. Our investors were like, wow, this is a great outcome, considering the fact that we could not have been in existence a few years before.
Well, I want to get to some of these commandments. We've talked about a few of them already. But again, audience, all six, this 2-pager of 16 commandments of acquisition entrepreneurship. Check your show notes for that. But let me go through some of these, Ayo. This is the number one commandment: making it to the top job, meaning becoming a CEO of a search business. Making it to the, quote, top job isn't a ticket to avoiding accountability. Your market, customers, employees will hold you accountable. They are harsher judges than any boss will ever be. Elaborate, please.
So for those who are running away from a boss, right? Just recognize that you have a personal relationship with the boss that you will never truly have with a customer, like your employees, your vendors, right? Those relationships are transactional for the most part, right? You meet their need or you're gone, right? A single boss, in many cases, at least in my experience, right? Sometimes they know you, they know who your kids are, they have some other relationship with you, and they might care, they might care to a certain extent. They're not making decisions in a vacuum or decisions that are solely based on their own personal interest alone. That's a very big distinction from, what it is to be the CEO of this business or of any business, is that your employees, in many cases, are making decisions that are solely in their best interest. Your customers are making decisions that are solely in their best interest. Your vendors are doing the same thing. And you are the guy in the middle that's left to wrangle all of that, right? And so, if you think that you're going to get here and all of a sudden you're in control of all these, kind of like myriad of forces, you're in for a rude awakening. There's some caveats to it, right? We talked a little bit about the Porter's 5 forces, and if you buy a business where you are truly not just a market leader, but I think about NVIDIA right now, who makes the chips for AI, who makes AI chips, right? They are living in a world in which the world is their oyster in many ways, right? Everyone kind of bows to them in many ways, except the government. The government could take away their their ability to kind of function the way they are. So the point is just that you're essentially giving up one boss for multiple bosses now, right? Mm-hmm. And you just need to acknowledge that, right? And yes, they're not in your space every single day. They're not slacking you to ask you, oh, like, what did you do today and all that. But they're actually more cruel because they're operating solely in their own best interest for the most part. And if you don't meet those objectives, you're gone, essentially.
Yep.
So that's the point there.
Fantastic. This one has been threaded throughout our conversation, but I think since it's your number 2, it deserves just calling it out again. Number 2, the industry you choose can break you much faster than your skill as a leader will make you. Choose wisely. Speak for itself. Just all about the industry. Well, anything more to say on that?
I think the only other thing I would say about this one is that a lot of money is made or not made before you step into that CEO seat. And I would not underestimate what that means. I often tell people that, they're the three H's of which I got into that led me into buying this business that maybe I shouldn't have, right? So there was hope, heart, and hubris. Hope, heart, and hubris, right? And the hubris part is the part you need to pay attention to. You are not going to dominate an industry, not as a small business. Some people do eventually, but that you should not walk in as a rookie CEO with the intention that that's what I'm here to do. And so picking that industry will give you such a leg up that even if you suck as a CEO, right, you could walk away, looking great. And I've talked to some CEOs that are like, well, are you sure you actually were a CEO? You're like, yeah. But the results, at the end of it, from a financial perspective, at least, would lead you to believe that, this person was, great. But, picking the right industry sometimes is really what drives, kind of the outcomes. So.
Number 5 commandment. I love this. You had said this to me in one of our earlier conversations, and it of course is life advice, not just buying a business advice. Focus on making decisions good, not just making good decisions. Don't obsess over two similar options. Put in the work to make the decisions that you make great ones.
Yeah. So this one is for the folks, maybe like me, who maybe, you're coming from a MBA school where, you get all this data and you analyze it and you're like, well, it could go this way, it could go that way, it could go this way, it could go that way. And in small business, you often do not have the luxury of time to make choices. Once you are down to a couple of different options, take one of them and make it the best decision that you could have made, and stop reflecting on the past, on what you could have done, and instead stick to what you've chosen and make it the best decision that it could be, right? This is about looking forward and not looking backwards, right? Yeah. And so, and I think, a lot of the folks that I went to school with, would get into this trap of, well, should I do this? If you look at it, even with searchers, well, should I go to self-funded? Should I do traditional? Should I do the accelerator? I mean, like, pick one option and make it the greatest option that you could have ever chosen, versus worrying about, whether you made the right decision or not. And that's the point here.
Number 6, in the early days, be great in the ways your business needs you to be great. In the future, your business will reward you by being great so that you can be whatever you want to be. What did that mean? I didn't actually fully understand that one, Ayo.
Yeah. So I think it's best to use an example here. I have the opportunity to coach a few CEOs now. And sometimes one of the things you see is, again, if you talk about people that came from the environment that I did, right? Corporate environment with a lot of great, support systems and structures. And you walk into this business, in small business environment, in which there's a lack of resources available to you to do what you need to do. And you need to step in and get dirty, right? And similar to what, I had to do in my business, I did every single job within the business. Sometimes there's a resistance to that. It's like, well, I really need an operations manager to fill this role. I really need, this new sales guy to do this. And the idea here is that early on, right, what your business is going to require of you may be something that you've never done, or you were not used to, right? Or does not feel comfortable to you, right? But in you kind of, dropping your resistance to doing those things, right, it will make you great. And eventually you won't have to do them anymore. And then you can do whatever you want to do after that, right? So be great in ways that the business needs you to be great initially, so that then you can be great in the ways that you want to be, versus, trying to be great in the ways that you want to be upfront, because your business will never get as great as you need it to be in the long haul if you don't flip it around, if you don't do it the other way, right? So I think that's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make there is, do not run away from doing the things that are required early, right? And it's not going to feel comfortable. In fact, the fact that it doesn't feel comfortable should be a sign that you should pursue it and do it in most cases.
This feels like a version of the value of working in the business. We're so often focused on working on the business and working, on just the big strategic stuff and not getting our hands dirty. But there's real value in working in your business for at least a time. It will enable you to work on the business better later.
That's a great point. I wasn't thinking of it that way, but I think that's exactly it. And it's also tied to the point I made earlier around, when you have a key man risk problem, sometimes it makes sense for you to become the key man for a period of time, and so absolutely right.
Jumping to the last of your commandments, number 16, be a winner. Winners are eloquent quitters. They use fancy words like pivot when something is not working. There's no glory in banging your head against the wall. The wall is designed to beat you. What does it mean that winners are eloquent quitters?
So, the point there is that, again, this goes back to kind of our ambition, our identity being tied to work and wanting to make something work so bad because you believe that, this was exactly how it was supposed to look when you were moving down that track. And in my case, if I would have continued moving down the track that I was on, this would be a totally different conversation that we're having today, right? And the point there is that if you look at leaders within it, think about Netflix, right? Netflix and the transition that Netflix has made over time, right? From where they started, DVD by mail to a full streaming service today. The greatest businesses in the world, right, don't take it personal when they need to pivot, right? Apple moving from the computer to the phone, right? All those things, if you look at the greatest businesses in the world, they know exactly, well, they maybe don't know exactly when to pivot, but they're not scared to do it. They don't let hubris or sunken cost fallacy prevent them from taking the right next step. There's another point I should bring up here, which is what I call the ambition trap, right? And this is like really, 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 really critical, is that, again, because of the ambition and the fact that identity is so tied to our work, a lot of times, you end up in a situation in which you're like, you can't divorce yourself from solving the problem. You and the problem are the same. And you need to actually be able to separate those two things. It's like a surgeon thinking that the person that they're working on, right, is their own heart, right? They won't be able to do the work that they need to do to actually solve the problem. And you need to kind of like step away from the problem and be able to kind of like see how to solve it effectively as a result of stepping away. And this is a version of that, is that don't let your identity prevent you from pivoting when that's the right thing to do in the business, right? Now you might need other people around you to help you see, what that is. But that was critical in my case. And if we did not pivot, we would not be here. We would not be here. So.
Great. I want to close with what you're doing today, and I think there's two things to talk about there. But before we do that, any other of the commandments that you really want to make sure the audience hears, or any other learnings from your journey? You've been great at just surfacing a lot of the lessons, but any that we didn't hit that you really wanted to?
I think we covered a lot of them. I mean, I could probably go on for days, and we don't have that kind of time. It was.
Well, here's one. Actually, Ayo, here's one.
Yeah, go ahead.
That we didn't get to, but it was in your Twitter thread, and it was, I think, the last realization I noted. Yeah. You write, "Staying at McKinsey would have made me more money, but this was the greatest professional experience of my life. When I'm 80, I won't be wishing I built more PowerPoint decks. I'll be boring my grandkids with this story. They'll roll their eyes, but I hope deep down it gives them the confidence to do hard things." So maybe doing hard things?
Yes. I think that's one of the commandments as well.
It is.
Right?
It is, actually.
Yeah. So I should say this as well. and this is, I get a lot of people that ask me, would you do it again? And really what they're asking me is, should I do this? That's really what the question is, what they're really asking me. And I often tell people is like, pursuing this entrepreneurial path, it's not for everyone, but if it is the path that leads you towards attaining your God-given potential, you should absolutely do it, because it's those experiences that bring you to your knees, and to your knees in prayer or in whatever, right? That grow you the most, right? Those 5 years were the greatest professional years of my life. They were also the hardest years of my life, and in some ways, I'm concerned that maybe I don't get to experience something like that again. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not glad, in terms of the experience, but it was kind of like a defining pivot point for me on a personal basis, and no one would characterize that experience as being easy, right? I've read, nothing. If you think about life and live life, nothing that gets accomplished that is valuable, right, is easy. When I go to the gym to work out, it hurts. That's a physical example of what is kind of like an ephemeral concept here, right? So that's the entire point, is that you want to do hard things. And so for those who are in a corporate job today, right, and you're like, hey man, I'm walking in every day, I'm working 2 hours a day and I'm walking out. And if you feel like, hey, this is going to allow you to kind of maximize your God-given potential, and that, it being hard is part of what you're seeking out of this, right? You should definitely pursue it, because it's going to lead you to the ultimate goal, which I stated before, which is finding fulfillment in something that's greater than you. Because it's in that partnership and relationship, for me, which is, in God, right, that you find your greatest fulfillment. It's not in actually accomplishing what you think is the goal. It's actually in having to rely on something that's outside of your self-sufficiency to realize that, oh, there's actually more to life than there is in me as an individual. And so that's how I think about this.
Beautiful, Ayo. This has just been such a rich conversation. Wow. To close us out, tell us about your day job, and then tell us about Operators Coach. You touched on your day job already. You work alongside Thomas Ince. Tell us about LP First Capital.
Yes. Yeah. So LP First Capital is we're an independent sponsor, actually, and we acquire low middle market businesses in dirty industries. For the most, dirty is not the right word. Service-based industries, so HVAC, roofing, property management. We own a dental platform as well. We've done 61 acquisitions over the last 5 years, and we're looking to do more. And in fact, we have a concept right now that we call the flip and roll. So, for searchers who are in that, $3 to $4 million EBITDA level now, and are like, well, I don't want to stop running this business, but, I need, additional capital to buy a bunch of additional businesses. We're partnering with those folks now. We're in conversations with 2 of them right now, to kind of, take their business, add many more to it, build a platform that take it to roughly 30 million EBITDA, and then sell those businesses. So that's LP First Capital. That's what we do.
What's your role there, Ayo?
Yeah. So I get to be on our operating team. So what that is, I have certain platforms where I partner with the CEOs and the leadership teams there, to help execute value creation plans, to drive process improvement, deploy operating systems, and then I serve as a coach to those CEOs as well. So that's kind of what I do day in and day out.
And how do you find the world of being investors? You're on the operating team of an independent sponsor group, so you're very operational, but still fundamentally, I suspect that many of the day-to-day conversations and the attitude of the organization is one of investor versus operator. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do you find thinking like an investor, the life of an investor, versus thinking like an owner-operator and the life of an owner-operator?
Yeah. So I get the opportunity to sit across from a lot of CEOs, and obviously as an operator, sometimes you want to kind of like, jump in the seat sometimes and say, well, why don't we do this or do that or do this, right? But then I remember that, I don't have to live with the sleepless nights right now. They do. on a day in and day out basis. And I have to respect that. And my role is that of an advisor to help them, drive them to becoming their best selves. From an investment perspective, I think the question you're actually asking me is, sitting on the other side of the table and evaluating these businesses. It's been extremely eye-opening in multiple different ways, right? So one of them is that, first of all, I want to talk about the part that's probably most applicable to searchers. There are different pools of capital in the world out there, and the only shot for a searcher to actually be able to win is to differentiate themselves in a different way than capital, because you can just not compete from a capital perspective. I think about some of the businesses that we are able to buy because we have larger platforms and what we're willing to pay, right? That 2, 3, 4, maybe turns over what a searcher can pay because of the caps of the SBA. And because we have a larger platform, it still makes sense for us to do those deals. And so the differentiator definitely has to be you, your story, right? And your willingness to kind of like step in the seat and do and be, that day-to-day leader of the business. So that's number one. Number two, I would say that, on the investing side, the bigger you get, as platforms get larger and larger, one of the things that, that becomes really apparent is that, number one, the problems are still kind of like the same. The problems are still the same, even at the lower level, or higher level. So, point being, buy as big as you can, because the problems are still going to be the same. You just need to, you want to have the cash you need to solve the problems, regardless of the size of the platform that you're going to get, right? So, I would encourage people to buy bigger. It would be another thing. There are probably several others that I'm not immediately coming to mind. And if someone called me, I'd probably think of some specifics. But it's been very illuminating.
Well, let me ask you this, Ayo. Do you want to remain on the investor side of the table for your career, or is there something in you that sees going back to being an operator, owner?
Yeah. So the way I think about my career now, in light of kind of what I've said around fulfillment, and I'll not go into that anymore, but I would say this, like, I think the lower middle market, there are many ways that an individual can play, right? You can play as a broker, you can play as a banker, you can play as an investor, you can play as an operator, you can play as an operating partner, you can play in private equity. My goal is to, or one of the things that I would like to see myself do is play in, many of these different spots, to be able to touch the elephant from its different sides, and I frankly, I get to do a lot of that now, but I'm an operator at heart. I'm an operator first, and could I see myself operating a business again? Absolutely. Is that day today? No, but I could certainly see myself operating again. Yes.
And to close this out for good here, Ayo, what is Operators Coach?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking that. So Operators Coach is a platform I started, about a couple of years ago, where I get the opportunity to coach CEOs who are acquisition entrepreneurs going through this journey. Like, every day as a new owner operator, like I said initially, everything feels existential. Like it's really bad or it's really, really good. And and some of them are, right. You're making these really tough decisions around, how to grow your revenue, right? You had a big customer just leave you, a key employee is threatening to leave, and there's a lack of sleep, right? All things that I've had to kind of like deal with and worry about. And, you have investors, but sometimes they're a fiduciary and you don't want to tell them everything. Sometimes it's like, well, should I tell them that? Is this the right timing? And sometimes it's not the right time to talk to them. You have your spouse or your partner, and you don't want to burden them with all the vicissitudes of what's going on in day of the business, right? And then your employees, you definitely don't want them involved. That's like, kind of like, trying to explain the birds and the bees to kind of like to to your kids, right? I mean, you don't tell them what that really means,
Interesting analogy.
Right. So the point is, CEOs need an outlet, and there's several outlets, to do this. They could peer groups, but the way that I this is like a passion of mine, just because I lived it and I've seen, kind of the benefits of it, is the opportunity to kind of like work one-on-one with CEOs to help them through the difficult periods and helping them make these decisions, each day, in a way that no other person, whether it's folks on your cap table or it's your spouse or it's your employees, can, just because I've lived the life.
Yeah.
And so,
and what is the format? Is it sort of a weekly call?
Yeah, well, it's usually twice a month, roughly. Sometimes it's weekly, depending on, if someone is going through something that's really, really tough. I don't do a lot of these, so this is not, if like 10 people reach out to me, it's not going to happen. I have a day job, but it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that brings me quite a lot of fulfillment. And when I think about making impact to people and their organizations, right? I feel a lot of joy when I do this, and so it's really more about that, and kind of like helping folks kind of navigate what I had to navigate, and maybe shorten, instead of it taking them 18 months to figure out something, maybe it takes them 3 weeks, and they can start moving down the right path. And so that's what that is.
Ayo, how can people reach out to you to take advantage of Operators Coach or otherwise?
Yeah. So, multiple different spots. Well, you can go to operatorscoach.com. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So multiple different spots, to find me. And I also look forward to talking to people who are looking to kind of, they're in that point, 3 million EBITDA, and looking to kind of, keep going, but, want to de-risk a little bit. And I'm looking for an equity partner to help them do that. We're looking for folks like that as well. So
for the LP on that's on the LP capital.
Yes, that's on the LP side. Yes.
Stuff.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Ayo, this was in fact worth the wait of getting on here. This was an incredible story, and your thoughtfulness about your whole journey, I think, is really something to admire and learn from. Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.